Right, I'm going to stick it on Williams for now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Rapid Formula One podcast. This is the first of many more to come. Today, we are going to be going over the Formula One Bahrain preseason testing. Just wrapped up today, if I'm not mistaken, because Haas got to finish up some late running that they were allowed to do due to some freight complications. I'm joined by none other than Jack Vaughn. How are you, my friend?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, it's a beautiful evening over here in the lovely German countryside. Just looking at the whole overview of the Bahrain testing, what's your biggest takeaway?
My main point that I took away from testing was there's the porpoising. I feel like that is going to be a huge problem for a lot of the drivers for one of two or three reasons. One being the main one, visibility. You're going into a braking zone and you're porpoising the hell out of it, and suddenly you're braking, and then you slow down and you see a car ahead of you, and you're already in the back of it by that point. I feel like, and George Russell did touch upon this as well. I'm not sure if you heard, but he did say that the porpoising is quite a dangerous thing, and he thinks it's going to be a safety issue. The reason for the porpoising, I think Ted Kravitz touched on it during his notebook, is where it is a completely new car. They only have four suspension arms now on each each corner of the car, so they're now flat, vertical, upright steering arms that go on to the hub of the wheel, onto the hub. Sorry, and I feel like where they haven't got that much stability through it now because they are having to, because it's so flat that it's just a completely different form of suspension they've ever used, and I think they're really struggling to come to grips with it. Some teams have done quite well with managing it. The Alfa Romeo, for one, looks absolutely stable as hell through the straight, through the corners. I was very impressed with them, and the Ferrari as well. I don't know if you noticed it or what your take on it was.
Well, porpoising's been around since the Lotus came up with the magical idea of ground effects on a car to suck it down to the racetrack. So it's a form of downforce that creates basically no drag whatsoever. It's the best form of downforce you can possibly have for a race car. But porpoising's been around since the old days of Lotus. Really, the biggest thing, I'll go ahead and just explain to everybody what porpoising is. For those of you that do know, you can go ahead and skip forward like a minute and a half. But porpoising is basically if you take the chassis of the car off and you're just looking at the floor, okay? The floor creates basically all the downforce for these cars. I think they said the new figure is like somewhere between 65 to 70% of the downforce is now being created by the Venturi tunnels that are in the floor. So if you just look at the floor itself, as the car is coming out of a corner, let's say they're coming out of a slow speed corner, like if you're at Bahrain turn one, as you exit turn one, you can see that the car is riding a little higher. That's because there's not enough air being channeled through the Venturi tunnels to pull the car down to create the downforce. Once they get moving, though, these cars are really kind of beautiful. You can visually see the downforce being created as the car lowers and gets the floor closer to the ground. So as the floor gets closer to the ground, it becomes a point where the floor stalls. So most of the cars we were seeing that when they were reaching speeds of about 160 or higher. Most teams were dealing with it at about 175 or higher, I would say, is where it became a big effect. But basically, the floor will stall out and it hits the ground, and then as it pops back up, it creates downforce again, and then it goes back down toward the ground, hits the ground, it loses all its downforce, it comes back up. This is what creates the porpoising effect. It creates vertical oscillation, it makes the car move up and down. Basically looks like George Russell is sitting on a trampoline rolling at 185 mile an hour down the front straightaway. Uh, I would have to say that I would agree that Alfa Romeo looked like they had porpoising pretty well under control for the most part, but they had some other issues that we'll get into later. To me, the team that looked like they had it most under control was McLaren. McLaren have this slat that's on the floor behind the leading edge. It's about, I would say, about 12 to 13 inches in front of the rear tire that's actually raised up off the floor just a little bit. And they're actually creating some vortices to go around the floor to help seal it off. And to me, they've done better than any other team to solve porpoising, but they're also having some other issues that we'll get on to later in the podcast. But we'll go ahead and we'll just look at day one real quick. So the fastest lap time was set by the AlphaTauri of Pierre Gasly with a 1:33.9. The most laps ran by a single driver over that day was Checo Perez, running 138 laps. The most laps for a team was Red Bull via Checo Perez. The least amount of laps ran by a team was actually, or by a driver, was Alonso. In the Alpine, they had an issue early on in the day, and that basically took them out for the whole rest of the day because they could not repair the car before they ran out of time. And then Haas, with their freight problems, they didn't get to really run any laps until I think they were allowed to do their happy hour at the end of the day. So we'll touch on that real quick. We haven't had a whole lot of information come out as to why Haas had this issue getting the car and the parts there, but it came.
It was released. Sorry to interrupt you. It was released. The plane broke.
Plane broke.
The freight plane that they were supposed to get on, everything was on. Went to go and do its startup procedure, and it just wouldn't work. Obviously, it's not just your standard plane where you can go and get another one from the hangar. These are big cargo planes that can withstand like a heavy amount of weight in them and still be able to get to maximum like thrust and still pull off. So it took them, I think it was about I think it was about 4 to 5 hours before the next plane even took off from where it was coming. I think they got their stuff flying within 12 hours.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure that they had all the stuff there. They had it all there close to lunchtime, I believe, and then they were putting it all together, and then that allowed them to get out and do. Let's see here. It says that they did 47 laps on day one, and that would also include the extra hour that they were allowed to have too. Correct? Or did they not do that until day two?
They were allowed 3 extra hours. They had an hour yesterday and 2 hours today, possibly, or it was
Well,
so
they had 4
2
extra
hours
hours
yesterday and an hour 2 days ago.
Well, they had 1 extra hour after session two, day two, and that's when K-Mag went out in the car. And then they had an extra hour yesterday, and then we believe that they had another 2 hours today on track. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't confirm whether they did or not today, to be fair to you. But to be fair to them, it's nice to see that the F1, obviously, they've been limited to how much running time they can do, how much wind tunnel time they have now as well. But obviously, Haas have had more than any other team. So I think that has benefited them a lot. So they have had that development over the other teams, even though they did in turn lose out on a bit of practice, but then they also did get those hours back. But it's nice to see that F1 is trying to be fair. Stefano
Domenicali.
Yeah, it's nice to see that he's obviously realising that he kind of has to be a little bit lenient to them and allow them to get a little bit of help as well. Obviously, with everything that's going on as well, they've just lost their title sponsor, Uralkali, and also sadly for everyone, and I'm sure Gunter is gutted by this, but they've also lost Nikita Mazepin due to obviously the ongoing uh, conflict, shall we say, in Russia, with between Russia and Ukraine. Sorry, and Dmitry Mazepin being one of the. I didn't actually realize he's one of the highest rated oligarchs in Putin's whatever friendship list,
Yeah, if you
shall we
want to call
say?
it inner circle or all his yes
Yeah, I
men
was
or
thinking
whatever
of
you
the
want to
inner
call it.
circle, but I thought, but yeah, he's so obviously he brought in almost 70% of their entire um funding for the last year, and obviously was going to be for this year as well. Obviously, Mick does bring in quite a lot of sponsorship, just the name, but also the talent he has as well.
Well, the number
So
that they came
Haas,
out with for last year was that the Mazepins brought in, yeah, about 65 to 70% of Haas's funding. But for this year, it turns out that Gene Haas has actually been waiting for these new regulations, and he was actually supplying the majority of the funds. And it turns out everybody was really worried that with the fertilizer company Uralkali being off the car and basically being told to go hit the hay with Haas, that they wouldn't have the money to run. There were some numbers released the other day that make it seem that Uralkali was only supporting Haas with about 20% of the funding for the year. Uh, but now there has been some rumors and stuff like that going around the social media areas that Dmitry Mazepin is actually going to go and do some formal action and hire some lawyers to actually go after Haas for the money that he's already paid them. So we could see some more controversy over that in
yeah,
the future.
I mean, I don't mean to kind of uh, side with Dimitri at all, but if you pay someone for something and you don't receive it, no matter who you are, you should get that money back. But I reckon he's only going to go for lawyers now, is because everything else of his has been like frozen. He can't use any of his bank accounts, and obviously we know he's probably sat on two mattress full of millions and millions of euros or whatever they use over in
I
Russia.
think they still use the ruble,
So,
don't they?
ooh,
I
thought that was a
think they're
drag
still
race.
on the Russian ruble.
But yeah, so I reckon he's mainly probably going to go back for the money because he's in a bit of a tricky situation at the moment. Um,
Well, we'll segue away from Haas, and we'll move
yeah,
on to the other few things that happened that I really noticed during the first day, straight out of the box, and just about everybody in rapid racing has agreed that the Ferrari looks really strong right out of the box. It looked like they could put on any tire. In the early morning session when they came out, they looked pretty good. They did a couple different scenario runs, came back in, made a few adjustments, went back out. But every time that that car was out on track, it looked stronger than the previous time it was out.
yeah, and I think they obviously where they haven't really developed their car very much. Obviously, last year was a bit of a bit of a change to the previous kind of four cars that we've seen from them, but I feel like they are the ones that have made the biggest step up in their pace, and they're consistent on the long runs as well. Um, it looks very stable, looks very kind of planted. And if you look back, say this time last year or this time the year before, all Shah was saying was you can't drive the car. It's horrible. It's horrible. But from all I've heard, I don't think there was much complaining or grumbling coming from either driver.
Yeah, and both drivers really, every time they got out of the car, more or less, other than you could see the visual neck pain from all the laps they were running, they looked happy. There weren't frowns. There were more or less smiles throughout the entire garage. But on the other side, two stalls down from them was Mercedes, uh, and they had some big smiles on their faces Monday, or excuse me, Thursday morning when they unveiled their new car that everybody has dubbed the Mercedes Zero Pod configuration. And if you haven't seen this car, you have to look it up. It is a very radical design that for about a day and a half, many people that are like me and go over the technical regulations and love to read into that stuff, we were all wondering if that car was actually legal or not. So were a couple other teams until some FIA stuff was handed out, and we could actually see that it does meet basically all the FIA standards that are asked for. But they unveiled this zero pod concept, and that, to be honest, I'm not sure what they're really looking for out of that. Yeah, the side pods are much smaller, should reduce the amount of drag because there's not as much surface area. Uh, they really had to package everything a lot tighter, cooling wise, but they didn't seem to struggle at all with cooling or reliability whatsoever. Their only struggle was the porpoising.
And do you think maybe where you're not getting as much flowing air over the top of the car that is pushing it down rather and it's going down onto the floor of the car, do you think that maybe is one of the reasons why they are suffering so badly with porpoising?
To be honest, that's a little beyond me. We've seen that uh, Ferrari, McLaren, and Alfa Romeo have all come up with different ways of getting around this porpoising. You could see when Red Bull had some Floviz paint on their front wing, you could see that they were actually creating vortices that downwashed from the end fence of the front wing and went around the front tire and were sucked back in toward the floor, and they were actually sealing the floor off. I think Alfa Romeo has gone for kind of the same concept, whereas the McLaren one is a little different, a little more difficult to explain. But I don't think that by having a car that creates less drag that you're going to have more of the porpoising effect. To me, that's almost kind of backwards. The more surface area that you would have on top of the floor, i.e., chassis, wings, whatever. To me, that would make it to where it would actually push the car down a little bit more, and that would affect negatively for porpoising and make it worse. But I mean, I could be completely wrong. I'm not an aerodynamic engineer. I'm not an aerodynamicist. I'm not any of those things. I'm just somebody who really, really loves Formula One.
Which often is an absolute curse an absolute treat at the same time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, especially when you're married and you have a kid. Formula One can ruin Formula One can ruin a marriage.
Well, speaking, yeah,
Well,
I can detest and well, I can agree completely and say that between league racing, F1, and rugby, is probably a very good reason as to why I am now single.
well, we'll segue,
Not by
move
my own
on.
choice.
Yeah, we'll move on to day two. So day two was kind of funny. We had, I think it was Signs actually set the fastest lap for that day in the normal running, but then K-Mag came out in the Haas, and he actually set a lap time that was quite a little bit faster. So K-Mag has the fastest lap time on day two of a 1:33.2. The most laps driven that day by a driver were Yuki the God Tsunoda for 120 laps. AlphaTauri also logged the most laps as a team that day. Latifi, though, and Williams really, really were hurting that day. They went out early in the morning session with what everybody was saying was a brake fire, but the team has come out and said that it was something to do with the wheel itself, with the hub, how they meet up. Something happened on the rear end of that car that I have not seen in years and years and years of motor racing. Both rear hubs literally caught on fire at like the exact same time. And it was actually bad enough, the heat got bad enough, or the stress of it got bad enough that as Latifi was going through turn 12, which at Bahrain is that really fast, long right-hander that goes uphill toward 13, he actually the left rear suspension actually failed on the car, and he spun out. Thankfully, he didn't have any damage other than the suspension failure and whatever the fire did, because it did take quite a little bit for a fire marshal to get there with where he actually was in the runoff area. But Latifi and Williams were the lowest running that day. They only did 12 laps. The damage was actually extensive enough that they came out before the lunch break and they said, we're not going to be able to run anymore today. It's going to take us the rest of the day to repair this car, to get it up and running again so we could test tomorrow. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because actually, that's actually the first thing that's on my list was, the Williams issue, possible hub or wheel rub somewhere that, just you could see on the onboard camera that was rear facing over the rear wing. You could literally see the sparks and everything rotating and flying around inside of the wheel well where it fits around the carbon fiber hub mechanism and everything. You could see it all in there and then getting shot out. And then he, like I say, he went into one braking zone and then he just went up to turn 12 and off went the left rear and he went off as well. So,
Um, I mean, the only thing I can think of is obviously you've got up to the new 22-inch wheels, I think. Um, yeah, thank you. So the only thing I can think of is that some teams are doing better and able to work the cooling out for these bigger brakes, bigger hubs. Um, I, I, I don't know. It seemed very coincidental that both of them went up at the same time, but then maybe it is, like I said, they aren't getting the cooling to the rear brakes enough as they'd wanted to, or like you said, there might have been, it might not have been sitting on the hub properly. The wheel, the way they've designed the wheel to go on, like as such, it might not fit on flush, and there might be a little bit of friction that's caused them both, or the axle might have been just out. Possibly, you might have, if the axle's bent a little bit,
well, see, on those
you've
cars
got
they
to.
have half shafts though. You have a half shaft on that car, so it's not like a traditional car like road car like what we're used to, where you have the transmission and then a drive shaft that runs back to a pumpkin, and you have the axle on the pumpkin. These cars actually it runs back to the gearbox, and then there's a half shaft that goes out each side of the gearbox down to the hub to power the rear wheel.
Maybe just an out of, maybe they were unaligned. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. It just, like I said, it seemed too coincidental for them both to go up at the same time and both have the same problem and them not know what it is, unless it's a problem that they don't want to disclose.
Yeah, maybe it was some sort of an upgrade that they tried to put on that morning, and he was only able to do, 12 laps, or excuse me, 11, yeah, 12 and a half basically, because he started smoking at turn 8, and then you could really, really see it on exit of 10 as he made his way down to 11. So, Williams has said that it was some sort of a hub issue, but they haven't really released anything more than that. So that's really all the further that we can go into that situation. But moving on, McLaren on the second day were actually struggling. You could visibly see it. McLaren were really, really strong, and the car looked really good in Barcelona during those 3 days of what Formula One doesn't want to call testing, because for some reason they don't want to call it that.
They didn't want us to see it either.
Yeah, even though they were releasing photos and videos and lap times and everything the whole damn time they were there, but whatever. Just ruined my chance to go to Barcelona and watch some Formula One cars because I couldn't go to Bahrain. Appreciate it. And there's no German Grand Prix either. Thanks, Nürburgring. But yeah, McLaren actually came out and said that they're struggling with something on the front axle itself, and we narrowed that down to your brakes are getting too hot. You could see that Lando was just struggling the entire second day with the same problem. He would get down into the corner, he would hit the brakes, and they would work for all of like 2 seconds, and he'd lock up a tire, and he just could not slow down. And if he didn't lock up, I think he might have actually been suffering from some brake fade, which is something that we rarely see in Formula One anymore, because these brake discs that they use nowadays, and the pads themselves and the drums and everything else, they are so amazing and so well made that we barely see brake fade anymore. But McLaren has actually come out and said that they can't fix the problem until next weekend at the Bahrain Grand Prix, and even then, they're not even sure if it'll be fixed because they're going to have to bring upgrades to fix it.
So that's going to take them at least 2 or 3 days in order to get the actual upgrades over to them.
Well, yeah, and
Well,
plus they
that's
have to
definitely
send
going
all
to put
the
them on the
data
back foot,
back
though.
too and get an understanding on it as well. Because it might be something as easy as chucking a different front wing on it to move some air up that direction toward the ducts some more. It might be something as simple as that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I would have thought people would have, like the teams would have kind of already have kind of pre-planned for this with every eventuality coming up. Obviously, you've got the first race in a desert, then the next race in another desert, so you know it's going to be hot. I don't know. There must be something that they have in place for it, because I don't think they'd be happy to just try and make little changes. They've got to change the whole concept of it, because you can't be having like what happened to Latifi happen in a race. You can't be having the fronts getting too hot for the McLaren. Like,
Yeah, no, I agree. And then on the other side of the McLaren garage, there's an even bigger issue that Daniel Ricciardo, on the first day of testing, told the team he wasn't feeling well. Team came and checked on him, and they said, well, why don't we just take the day off, see if you feel better tomorrow. The next day he woke up, said he still didn't feel right, wasn't good enough to drive. So then it was announced around lunchtime during the second day that Daniel had actually tested positive for COVID-19, and that he was now having to isolate, and now he has to wait basically 10 days and test negative in order to come back. But it looks like it's a very slim chance of him coming back for the Bahrain Grand Prix. So what does McLaren do in this standpoint?
so they got two options here. Let's quickly say it's Pajala. Good morning, my man. I hope you are doing well from down under. He says, right pedal more, left pedal less. Problems fixed.
Shut up, France Tost.
But yeah, I think personally they've got two options really. They have been offered and opened up to, and have acknowledged that Alpine have said that they will allow Oscar Piastri to drive for them for the Bahrain Grand Prix, which I think would be the best option, because he's at the track, he's got the relative licenses, which we'll go into in a second, obviously why I'm mentioning that. And why the hell not? We're seeing what these young talents can do. You put another young talent in that car with Lando, I genuinely think they'll do great. I think he could do great things there. I'd be very surprised if, with COVID still going around, if there aren't some form of reserve drivers needed for a session or a race this season. So it'd be nice to see him actually get a drive for Alpine. Maybe Esteban Ocon can get permanent COVID. But yeah, I would go with Piastri. And obviously you actually know a little bit more about their second option and who this fine fellow is. So I'll let you take this part.
Okay, well, yeah, the second option McLaren has is Colton Herta. He's famous in the United States as an IndyCar driver. He's a very, very well-rounded and very talented IndyCar driver. He's very super in the wet. We saw him. I can't remember what year it was. It was like a year or two ago at Austin at the Circuit of the Americas in the wet. It was really coming down, and he was the only driver who seemed to be able to really cope with the conditions and pull it off and make all the right tire calls at the right time, because it was in and out kind of sporadic showers, and they were on and off different tires trying to make everything work. But Colton Herta, McLaren announced Friday during the afternoon session that they had just signed him to their development driver program. Now, from what we understand, Colton does not hold a FIA super license, which is a license that you are required to have in order to be able to race in Formula One. We're not sure if DR3 cannot make it back for the Bahrain Grand Prix, if Colton Herta would even be able to race, because we don't know how McLaren would get that super license obtained for him. There's a few ways you can do it. One, by winning championships, whether it be F2, F3, or IndyCar. However, the IndyCar one is highly stacked against them, because I think it's only 40 points that an IndyCar championship will award for your safety license, or for your super license, I mean. But he could do a 300-kilometer test, and if he finishes that with no issues, he could then obtain the super license and be able to go racing. In my opinion, Uh, I'm going to be a little biased because I am American and I really want to see an American that I know can do good. I'd love to see Colton Herta in the car if Daniel Ricciardo can't make it back. Yeah, Oscar Piastri is the reigning F2 champion, which obviously means that he can't drive F2 this year. He doesn't obviously want to step back to Formula 3, but he couldn't find a seat in Formula 1 because they had just signed that how many multi-year deal with Ocon at Alpine, and he's an Alpine Academy driver, is Piastri. So he's kind of like a rock in a hard place. He's just stuck there. There's nothing he
Mm.
can really do. So it wouldn't bother me to see either of those two drivers get the shot at it. As an American, I'll be a little biased and say that I'd rather see Colton Herta get that shot because he is an astounding driver on ovals. And Grand Prix circuits. On the ovals, we've seen Colton be completely fearless with guys like at Texas 2 years ago. Texas is a 1.5 mile oval, high banked. He was not afraid to go right through the middle of three other cars that were already three wide, and he stuck it four wide and went right through the middle of them to take the lead throughout turn 3 and 4. We've seen him make some daring overtakes at tracks like Barber, Sebring. The kid's just not scared of a car whatsoever. And I'd really like to see that on an F1 track out of an American, unlike what we had in Scott Speed. Uh, so we'll move on
Just
to
got
one other. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, just got Pajala in the chat saying, don't forget they also have access to Van Dorn and De Vries from Mercedes as well. And obviously both of those hold a super license. I would imagine they're probably both at the track as well.
Well, both those
Um,
drivers would be at their home base getting ready for Formula E, though, wouldn't they not?
Depends. As soon as they heard that, they probably got on a plane to Bahrain, whether they knew they were driving or not.
Yeah, but
I
Van
mean,
Dorn. Yeah, but Van Dorn's done that before at this exact same circuit, and gotten screwed and said, "Nah, just sit in the back because they're going to put Jack Aiken in that car, and we're going to pull George out of that one and put him in our car." So there's really no point in us having you here as a hired reserve driver.
yeah.
But it is a
Uh,
good point that he raises because Nick DeFries has already gone out and literally stomped the competition in Formula E his first year there. So it wouldn't surprise me if Nick DeFries and Stoffel Van Dorn were both in the quote unquote question area of who's going to be in that car. But the other thing that I really took away from day two was Alfa Romeo. They were not the car that had the least amount of laps ran, but they did not run a lot. I think they might have logged under 40 laps that day because they were really suffering with some hydraulic issues. The other thing was it was never reported what it was, but the Red Bull they came back into the pit lane and the camera panned in, and you could actually see there was water coming out of the engine cover. You could see it just slowly dripping its way out of the engine cover onto the bodywork over the side pod. Uh, but nothing really else to take away from day two for me. Did you have anything from day two that you thought we should mention that I didn't have on here?
um, no. It was. I think it was kind of that. It was that middle day where everyone was kind of just wanting to kind of find the stability. But the problem is with these practice sessions as well. A lot of them, until the end of the session, were all done in conditions that these guys would never race in, would never even do a qualifying session in. So to me, and I think a lot of teams would have been thinking as well, a lot of the time, a lot of the data that they would have been getting and the tyre deg they would have been getting, they could probably cut that down by at least 4 or 5 laps worth of deg and say it would be better because of the conditions of the track. Like, I mean, I think at one point Ted Kravitz said it was near on like 38 degrees at one point during the day. Like, it was roasting hot there. You're not obviously you don't unless other than certain tracks and certain events where they've had to, and it has been very very hot. They don't ever really run in that hot a temperature around that track.
Yeah, I would agree with you that a lot of the cars were kind of struggling yesterday due to the temperatures. We saw that they were uh, getting a lot more comfortable in the cars later in the day with about 2 hours left in the session when the sun started to go down below the horizon and the track temperature and the ambient air temperature started to cool off. You could visually see that a lot of the cars were a bit happier in there around that time. But we'll go ahead then and move on to day 3, the final day of testing, which is where we were hoping to get some representative times closer to the end of the day. So day 3, we had Verstappen going the fastest. I believe he did it on the C4 compound, which is one step below the softest compound in the Pirelli range. But Verstappen did a 131.7. The most laps ran that day were actually from Latifi. Latifi came back strong after the issue on the second day, and he did 124 laps, which is the second highest of any driver throughout the whole
And I think he blocked
session.
the car on every single lap of that as well.
He may have. We did see a lot of onboards of a lot of on-track foolery and foolishness going on.
Every time I saw him pop up, I said, "Oh, what's he done now?"
Yeah, we were all in a group together, and I remember hearing that. Most laps ran by a team that day were actually Alfa Romeo. The least laps ran was Albon with only 18, and the least laps ran by the teams was McLaren. McLaren was still dealing heavily with the front axle issue, but
And
it
only
seemed
having
like
one driver.
yeah, and also Lando had to have been getting sore after all the laps he had pulled from the 2 days prior. But it seemed to me that McLaren did bring upgrades to try and help solve the issue they were having on the front end of the car on day 3. You couldn't really tell a visible difference in the first session that day because they had him out there doing a lot of weird laps, and then he continued that into the second session. We saw Lando out there basically running around in like fourth gear doing about I don't know, 80 mile an hour, about 130k an hour, and he was really doing something weird that we haven't seen anybody do that I can think of in my lifetime since I've been really watching Formula One and paying attention. He was actually holding the same speed around the whole track, which was basically like a minimum speed that he could pull through every corner and not really struggle with anything. And he would get into the corner and go way past the slip angle with the steering input. And what that means is, so he basically turns the wheel to where it would be to where the car would turn in and go through the corner, and then goes completely past that for no reason other than the team told him to. And he did that lap after lap after lap after lap. I think he did at least like 20 laps that way, but it was sporadic. He would do like 3 laps like that and then come in, and they'd have the car up on the jack stands looking at a whole bunch of different things, and he'd set him out and he'd do it again. So we weren't really sure what was going on there. But McLaren, to me, actually looked like they had not solved the problem, but visibly you could tell that the upgrades that they had brought had kind of helped the issue. Later in the day, we saw Lando out there on the C3 doing a race run. His lap times were not bad. He was actually doing pretty well. The best lap he actually ran that day was 1.4 seconds off of Verstappen's fastest lap, and Verstappen was on the C4. So Lando out there trying to figure out with the rest of the team what's wrong with the car so that way they can get it ready for he and Daniel. Let's see, one of the other big things from that day was Red Bull brought upgrades to their car as well. They brought new front wings and a couple different side pods they tested that day as well. The first ones that they put on a new front wing and an upgraded side pod. The very first lap that they went out on, the car went green in every sector compared to what it was the day prior. And before any of us could even say anything, the cameras on the F1 TV app literally just turned and looked at Helmut Marko, and Helmut is turning around, looking off the pit box back into the garage with a humongous smile on his face, and Adrian Newey's just standing there staring at him with this big grin on his face. So, what did you take away from that between that exchange between Helmut and the aerodynamic god.
It's just an engineering god, not just an aerodynamic. Uh, I, I feel like it's one of those Spygate things. In my opinion, I feel like it's something that they've seen off these cars for the last however many weeks since the testing in Spain, and then come in here. Because when you actually look at the Red Bull now, in my opinion, the front nose is Ferrari, the side pods are almost kind of now like Mercedes, and their floor tray and their rear of the car is looking very McLaren now. I feel like they've kind of just gone and swapped and seen what the other teams are doing and developed that in their own way. That's just my opinion. That's just, yeah, that's it really.
Okay, I mean, I was really looking at it heavily that day with the Red Bull. They were literally just taking gallons of Floviz during this test and dumping it on all the cars. So it was really cool because in previous years they've been really stingy with the Floviz, so it's been really hard for the camera guys trackside to really pick up the Floviz. That way, us at home could actually read the Floviz trails and see what it was doing. Uh, but it looked like they were creating an even harder downwash effect off that new front wing that they had. And on their side pods, you could like visibly see through the Floviz. They took a bunch of Floviz and put it on the front of the side pod within like the first 6 inches of it, and they didn't put any throughout the rest of it. And you could see the Floviz trails as they were running around. And then when they brought it back in, there was like a still shot that I saw where you could actually see the air is really staying attached to that side pod, and it looks really good. Whereas some of the other cars, you could see where they were splashing Floviz on, and then you were like, well, hold on a minute. There's a big gap between this blotch of Floviz on the side pod and all this Floviz back here on the side pod. But I know that they left the garage with only Floviz up here. So that means that there's, the air's not staying attached to the car right here. So it was really nice this year that they were just dumping gallons of Floviz on the cars so that way us at home could actually see what was going on, try to understand what every team is doing aero-wise, trying to move that air around and in and through the car. I feel really bad for whoever has to clean all that up though, because we could see yesterday as they were pulling different parts and stuff off, the Floviz was just getting everywhere, all over the garages, all over the pit lane. But we'll move on. Ferrari is my next bullet point. They still look like the strongest car out there, straight out of the box. They've been making changes, like I said, all test long. And it seems like every time that Ferrari comes out of the garage, it was even better than it was before. You can see that Charles and Carlos were really not having to do any major steering corrections, whereas you could see the Mercedes, every time it exited a corner, they were having to make a counter steer input to the wheel to try to keep the car steady. But to me, Jack, Ferrari looks really good.
Yeah, I have to echo everything you were saying there. I just want to touch again on the instability of the Mercedes. Now, last season we saw in testing that they were saying that they were miles off the pace. They were trash, and they must have had about 4.5 kilos worth of sandbags in their car because they came out Bahrain all guns a blazing. But I'd like to believe that what Lewis is saying is true and he doesn't think they're going to be battling for wins yet, but I feel like that's just putting a false sense of security. I don't even think they've put anything less when they've done runs in that car, anything less than at least 10 laps of fuel in for a single run on one of their fast push laps. I would like to see, and I would really, really like to believe that Ferrari are where we think and hope that they are. They definitely deserve it. It's one of the teams that is the most historic and the most successful team in Formula One history, and I'd love to see them get back to winning ways, especially with the partnership they've got with Charles and Carlos. But yeah, I mean, of all the looks, just from what you can see from the car and just the way it looks on track, the Ferrari and the Alfa Romeo, in my opinion, are the two standout cars that look the most grounded, at least. Maybe not the fastest, but they do look the most grounded.
Yeah, I'd have to echo that and agree that, uh, me and a few other guys were sitting down the other day really trying to pick apart the Ferrari and try to understand how that car was working because they do have that radical, what I call the Eau Rouge side pod design. Because if you actually look from behind the car, you could actually fit Eau Rouge and Radeon into the side pod of the car with the curvature and the contour that they have on it. But yeah, we were all trying to understand because it didn't correlate the moving the air off the front wing and under the nose into the under or not the under tray, but the floor area with the Venturi tunnels and everything. Uh, we weren't really understanding what the side pod was all about, and then it came out. I think it was Gary Anderson at the race. I'll credit him with it. He actually did a really in-depth analysis on this, and he believes that it's all about reducing drag. They're creating some sort of a low-pressure area within that those two tunnels that are on either side of the side pod, other side of the engine cover. And they're actually just reducing drag through that, reducing their drag coefficient. We all know that the lower the drag coefficient is, the faster you will be in the straight line. So, but yeah, my next bullet point was actually Mercedes, because Mercedes, to me, is still the only team that's really standing out with big porpoising issues. Day one, we really saw them bouncing around down the straightaway. Like I said earlier, it looked like George Russell was just sitting on a trampoline. Some of us guys were joking the other day watching the final session that they needed to get a Walmart trampoline sponsor or something and put it right on the hood of the car. And they also need to get like a painkiller sponsor because they're going to need some painkillers when they get out of that car. But I was actually noticing towards the end of day two, I noticed it once. Really didn't think anything of it because I thought they might have just been running like heavy fuel or something like that. But then on day three, every time they panned to that car as it was going down the front straightaway and as it went through like the high speed turn of turn 12, it's bouncing up and down like crazy. Yeah, boing, 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 the whole
All you
time.
can imagine George and Lewis doing in that car is going ow, 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 ow. Oh, that's better. And they'll just come over the radio. Do I have to go fast? It's uncomfy.
No, but my biggest takeaway from day three for Mercedes was their porpoising, because they're not only doing it in straightaways now, but they're also doing it in the corners. You could visibly see it every time they went through turn 12. You could see the body roll over just a little bit to the left-hand side because it's a right-hand corner. You can see the body roll out to the left just a little bit, and then you'd see that floor just start smacking off the ground. And it's not like what we saw last year where they had the planks under the cars and it was, nothing unusual to see a car kind of smacking off the ground. It was no big problem because all the downforce generation was happening on the front wing, the side pods, the barge boards, and the rear wing and the top floor surface of the car. But now it's all happening underneath on the Venturi tunnels. Most of it is all being generated by the floor. And if that floor is smacking off the ground, coming up and becoming stalled and completely unloading of downforce and then reloading downforce, and it's doing that over and over and over again in a corner, as a driver, how can you have any confidence in that car that you're going to turn into the corner, keep your foot where you want it, and then it's going to stay aligned and it's going to go around the corner? I just don't see it.
You can't, and it's seen. It can take the tiniest thing to unsettle one of these cars. And I mean, let's look at Charles Leclerc, Monza 2020. Yeah, 2020. Come round Parabolica. I don't know what it's called now, and I'm going to continue to call it Parabolica till I die. Tiny bit of oversteer, went to catch it, and by the time he's caught it, the car's already caught itself, and you're gone. So you just imagine how that only happens once, but this porpoising effect is like one of those, but every 3 seconds. or every millisecond, sorry. And when you're going through a fast corner like that, and you can just about catch one of those. Imagine what it's going to do if you're doing like 5 or 6 of those as you're going around up to the end of sector 2. You're gonna end up with some serious crashes.
Yeah, and the other thing to take away from that is that the teams have actually come out and said that they would like 5 extra kilograms of weight added to the weight limit because a lot of teams started experimenting with what I'll call like a torsion bar, basically that runs off of the rear of the engine cover, basically near the gearbox, down to the floor to try and make the floor more rigid because they were thinking that the floors were flexing so much that it was actually helping to further cause porpoising. So some of the teams still fighting for that. A lot of the teams are still fighting to get down close to the weight limit. From what we understand, at least 8 out of the 10 teams are not at the weight limit yet. So we'll see how that progresses to the Bahrain Grand Prix. The other thing that I took away from day 3, big notice, was Red Bull. Red Bull looks very, very consistent, and with the way that you could see the flow viz on the car, you could really tell just how they were moving the air from the front wing and underneath to the Venturi tunnels and how it was going over that and going to the side pods and then going down to the floor and then being redirected up toward the beam wing on the rear end of the car, because now they have the top main plane, which is where the DRS system and all that is, which is generating downforce, and they also have the beam wing, which is down below that, just below where the exhaust is exiting the car, and they're creating downforce there now as well. And to me, the Red Bull looks very consistent, whether it was Checo or it was Max in the car. You could see both of them were literally just coming down to a corner, braking for it almost perfectly. They weren't really locking up as much as we saw other teams locking up and having that issue. And they could just turn in and then just ease off the steering wheel, get down into the throttle pedal, and it was gone. They didn't really have any counter steer moments. The only time that we saw an inconsistency was when really late in the session yesterday, or excuse me, yesterday when Max was going for a push lap. It looked like he just didn't have these tires in the right temperature window, and he got on the loud pedal to go on the front straightaway, and it just went around, which we've all done in the video game, and sure everybody's done in the simulators. So, but yeah, I think Red Bull looks really strong. The only other thing that I have is Alfa Romeo, because Alfa Romeo is still having issues with their, could be hydraulic, but it sounded more like the gearbox. So there was like 3 minutes left in the session. Bottas is in the car, and he comes around turn 4, which is the exact same place that he had a problem the day prior. He was in 4th gear. He downshifts into 3rd. Everything seems fine. He goes back to 4th gear, and he can't get into it. He downshifts back to 3rd, slowly eases into the throttle, and thinks to himself, oh, hey, okay, yeah, I'm getting power to the rear wheels again. Whatever it was to sort itself out. Goes to take 4th gear, and immediately you just hear the engine revs up. You can just audibly hear something is wrong in that gearbox, making a very, very weird noise. So Alfa Romeo, to me, seems to be the only team that's really a standout for reliability.
Yeah, they haven't had any problems really, have they? Obviously, other than that gearbox issue with, or whatever it was, whether it was a gearbox or like you say, that wasn't a bad test for them. They clocked the miles in. I think Bottas definitely got to grips with the new car. He looked like he was just out on a Sunday drive, but he was definitely putting in the laps and keeping some good pace in it as well. So it'd be interesting to see whether they've got any consistent race pace when it actually comes down to next weekend.
Be interesting to see.
A week today, we will know.
Yeah. Well, a week from today, we will know where these teams stand. But we'll look at the final times that were set in the afternoon session. All these times came in late in the evening with like less than 10 minutes left in the session. Pretty much optimal conditions for these cars. So you got Verstappen on the top with a 131.7, and then Leclerc behind him, 6 tenths off Alonso 9 tenths off, Russell 1 second off. And correct me if I am wrong, but I believe Russell was on the same tire as Verstappen, and he was a second off in the Mercedes. We just got done talking about Alfa Romeo. Bottas comes home in fifth to end the session with 1.2 seconds off of Max Verstappen's time. Yuki Tsunoda is right behind him at 1.282 seconds off. Checo Perez is 1.3 seconds off, so that time actually came in the morning session. So that just shows you how strong I think Red Bull is. Mick Schumacher sets a time. He was 1.4 seconds off of Max. Norris was right behind him. Late in the stages, you could tell that he was on a heavier fuel run on the C3s, and he went 1.4 seconds off. And then the 10th time was Vettel in the Aston Martin, and he was 2.1 seconds off. And I will say, out of all the teams that we've talked about so far, as I look back through my notes, Aston Martin is really the only one that sticks out that we haven't talked about. Aston Martin really, I feel like, flew under the radar because they weren't having any problems
They didn't
that
really
were
do
making
much, did
headlines.
they, either?
Yeah, and they didn't really do anything spectacular either. They kind of pulled off like a BAR from the olden days. They just kind of flew under the radar. Nobody really noticed them. For a little while, I forgot that they were there.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't, like you say, they didn't have any reliability problems. They got the laps in. I'm just having a look in here on the overall timing. Yeah, you got Stroll 15th overall for all sessions combined with the fastest times. Seb was 12th, Stroll was 15th. So I think we're going to be looking at the Aston Martin pretty much where we saw them last season, like just scraping kind of the back end of the mid pack, I think. I think they'll be battling with the likes of Alpha Tauri sometimes, like with Yuki maybe. Gasly, we know he can extract the most out of that car, most occasions. And maybe Alpine as well. I think it will be a Ferrari. Well, we'll get into that in a second. But,
Yeah, we're about to
one
move
thing we
on to
did
that.
miss out at the last, obviously we touched on Haas having their freight issues, but obviously they were given an allotment of time at the end of each session where they were allowed the track to themselves. Mick Schumacher in the overall timing got his Haas with a 1:32.2 on the medium tyres up to P2 in the overall fastest lap times. So considering he's 3 tenths off Max, who's on the softs,
Well, you
who,
said you
like I said,
said
I
you
don't
said a
think we've seen a
132.2.
representative. 1:32.2 and Max did a 1:31.7.
Yeah, so he's about half a second back, but he's still in front of Leclerc. But we don't know when that time was ran by Haas. We don't know if that was later
Yeah.
that evening or if it was during. I believe that they had a few hours today that they were allowed out on track. That would have been set during the blistering heat of the day. If that was set during the blistering heat of the day today, I would be looking out for that Haas come next weekend. But we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the final thing that we have on our itinerary this evening, which is going to be who looks the best after testing. Who do we think will be running the best as a team, not as a driver, but as a team come the Bahrain Grand Prix this coming weekend? So we'll go ahead and start with Jack. Jack, who do you have as number one after testing?
I've gone Red Bull. A lot of people have said that they've been very impressed with them. Crofty and I hate to say this, no, Martin Brundle, the
Don't say his
donkey.
name. Don't say his name.
Oh, I had to. I'm sorry. We'll just call him the donkey. I can't stand him, to be honest. He's useless. They did say if we would it be a fair statement to say that Red Bull are the standout car of this practice session in the entirety of the 3 days. I would agree. They've got some good laps in. Max spinning, Checo beaching it. that goes by and by with driving a new car, which you've only ever really driven 3 times maximum, I would say, for any of these drivers with test days, like photo shoots and press days and stuff like that. Um, I would say, yeah, solidly that they are obviously that. Well, where did Checo come as well? He wasn't too far off. So yeah, first and eighth, with Checo. I don't think he really did any proper push laps either.
Well, no, and
And we still don't.
Checo set that time in the morning session because Max did all the evening running in the afternoon session. So
Yeah,
Checo set that
so it
time
would
in
have
the
been
morning
boiling.
session. Yeah.
Yeah, his tyres would have been cooked before he'd even probably got to the end of sector two. Um, but yeah, I've gone Red Bull, sturdy, strong number one. What about yourself?
Well, I've gone Ferrari. I think Ferrari looks really good. My biggest thing is, I'm a diehard F1 fan. I'm a diehard McLaren fan. Uh, I've always liked Carlos Sainz. I loved him when he was in our car. I really like what I've seen from Charles, especially in 2019. He was not afraid to get his elbows out and do some hard racing. And both of those guys seem very, very comfortable with the car. Like I was saying earlier, every time you saw them getting out of the car, there was never a frown on their face. There was never like a huge smile, but they were kind of just playing it calmly. But you could tell that Ferrari was happy with their car. I
Their
think,
poker face was almost as good as their performance.
yeah, yeah, I would go ahead and put Ferrari at the top because I actually have Red Bull second. I have Red
And
Bull
I actually have
second.
Ferrari second.
Oh, well, look at that. Well, I have Red Bull second for the simple fact of the only reason I have Red Bull second is because they have the Honda carryover engine that is now being looked after by the Red Bull technicians. Yeah, they did pull a lot of people from Honda itself to come over to Red Bull Powertrains, which is their new division. But I think it might, I don't know why I have a reservation about the engine. Something about that engine gives me a reservation. That's why I have them in second. They looked good all throughout the test. Don't get me wrong, but Sainz and the Ferrari were usually on the harder tire, running faster lap times than the Red Bulls. So that's the only reason that I have those two reversed compared to you, Jack.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I've got Ferrari. I mean, to be honest with you, either one of those could have been top, for multiple of reasons. Mainly Red Bull. Obviously, they were just consistently getting the laps in. Solid, very, very, very stable, and looks good on a one lap pace as well. If we've ever even got close representative times, but Ferrari. I can't fault them. They're like you say, they didn't really have any problems at all. I feel like we're jinxing it now, though. Really feel like we're jinxing it. But like you said, they just got the laps in. They enjoyed it. They always came out with a little smirk on their face, but they didn't ever look upset. They weren't grumbling. So I think they're the ones to watch out for, I think. But I was going to say the silent killers for this season, but I don't think they're going to be silent. I think a lot of people are expecting Ferrari to come back.
Yeah, over the past few years, we've been hearing, all the Ferrari fans and everything. Oh, Ferrari looks really strong after testing, and then they show up to the first week and they're just shite. I really hope that's not the case this year. I really hope that, Ferrari wasn't just running push lap after push lap after push lap on a low fuel run, trying to psych everybody out into doing something different, trying to chase this Ferrari concept that they have on their car. Uh, but we'll move on to third place. I actually have Mercedes in third just due
Same.
to the amount of porpoising that they're dealing with. It looks like their car is going to struggle in the high speed corners unless they get some massive fix for it within the next 5 days that they can bring to practice sessions on Friday at Bahrain to test with and correlate, make sure that it's working.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. I think they've got a bit of work to do, but I also think there's a bit of sandbagging going on as well. But we shall see. We shall see. Who have you got for four?
Well, fourth, I actually have Alpine. Alpine, they had an issue the first day, but then you look back, you have let's see, where was it? Alonso only ran 24 laps on the first day, but then him and Esteban logged a bunch of laps on the following days. The car didn't really look like it was having too many issues until late in the running on the third day. You could see they had made some sort of a setup change as they were trying something different with the car, and Fernando was really struggling with it. There were two times when the camera panned to him and they were like, "Oh, well, let's follow on board with Alonso," and he's going through turn 11, which is the heavy braking zone off of the second DR straight. You could see as he's going through the corner, the car's not really wanting to turn in. He's dealing with a big amount of understeer, and then all of a sudden he's out over the curbing. He's trying to get on the throttle, and the back end of the car is just like, "Yeah, I don't know what you're trying to do here, bud. This is not what I think we should be doing." And Alonso's just sawing away at the wheel. But I think Alpine showed up with a pretty decent car this year. I think that some of the other runners have made it to where Alpine is at this spot in my placement, but for now, I'm going to leave Alpine at fourth.
So my fourth, I went McLaren, purely just because they seem to, and like I touched on earlier, I feel, and I echo what George Russell says, I feel like porpoising is going to be a big safety concern and a big problem for a lot of teams this season, unless it's something they can get sorted. So I've gone McLaren for P4 because they seem to have the porpoising sorted out, and that seems to be less of an issue and probably a harder fix than their front end problem that they've got at the moment with the front wheels.
Well, I've actually gone with McLaren for fifth, right behind Alpine. And the only reason I put Alpine in front of McLaren was because of the huge issue McLaren was having with the front axle during the last test at Bahrain. Like I was saying earlier, McLaren's really struggling with some sort of brake temperature issue and some brake fade. They told us that basically it's not going to get fixed during this test. We do have upgrades coming for Friday to try and help it, which it did look like they aided it a little bit, but not a lot from what we could tell. As, like I said, they had Lando out doing some really weird runs during the day. And then, yeah, I agree that they do seem like, in my opinion, the best car when it comes to porpoising. They're not really doing it a lot, if at all, ever. But I do feel like I'm worried about McLaren. I'm not going to lie. I'm a huge McLaren fan, like I said earlier. I'm worried that they're going to be a double retirement at the Bahrain Grand Prix unless they have something magical happen back at the factory this week and they can correlate some data and get something together for an upgrade for the front end of that car. But yeah, I've got McLaren P5.
Yeah, so my P6, I've gone
You have in
Alfa
P5.
Romeo. At P5, I've got Alpine, sorry.
Oh, okay. So we're just flip flopping here for the first
We
five.
are, yeah. The only one we've got the same at the moment is Merck. But yeah, my sixth I've got, and just because of the stability, the consistency, obviously they had that issue with Bottas's car being stuck in fourth, but the engine was still going. So it wasn't actually an engine problem itself, I don't think. But yeah, I've gone Alfa Romeo just because of they just looked like a solid, and I think Bottas behind the wheel of that car is really going to do bits.
Yeah, I can see that. I definitely don't have Alfa Romeo in sixth. I actually have uh, the washout Red Bull driver Pierre Gasly and AlphaTauri in sixth place. The AlphaTauri just looked really. It looked easier for Yuki Tsunoda to drive. I'll put it that way. Last year, Yuki was really struggling, and this year, it looks like Yuki is right on top of it. He's not really having as many issues with this car, which tells me that it's a good car. Pierre's not having any issues with it either. They're both out doing solid running every day. Really, no big issues from them. Sonoda even logged the most laps out of anybody, and AlphaTauri logged the most laps day two with 120 laps, respectively. So I would say AlphaTauri is a solid sixth place going into the Bahrain Grand Prix.
So I've actually got Alpha Tauri P7. Have you got Alfa Romeo P7?
No.
Damn it! We were doing so well.
Well,
Okay,
why'd you put
so
AlphaTauri P7?
um, personally, because I thought out of the next to the cars that were coming, I think under the radar they kind of flew a little bit quiet. They did some bits. They didn't really have any problems at all, really. Yeah, I just feel like they were just Alpha Tauri. That's the best way to put it. It's just Alpha Tauri. Just there. Sometimes has the pace to be up there at the top, which is what we saw with Pierre's lap on the first day. I just think, yeah, like I say, they are just Alpha Tauri, so they're always just going to be there fighting in the mid pack, but they're never really going to be anywhere crazy. But I feel out of all of the cars that I saw and watched throughout the 3 days, I felt like didn't really see as much of them via the televised side of it, and also just pure pace really from them.
Okay, well, I've actually got Aston Martin in seventh.
I've got them
Uh,
in eighth.
okay, well, I'll tell you why I've got Aston Martin in seventh. I feel like 2 years ago, when they made that tracing point, as it was dubbed, I feel like they really hurt themselves. Uh, I had said the whole year that they were running that car, I don't like the idea of tracing out another car that's doing really well and trying to make that work for you. Uh, Aston Martin has not really looked good, and they haven't looked really bad. That's why I've got them down here in seventh. Because I feel like they hurt themselves because they traced out another car, and then you could see that the very following year, when they made a slight regulation change to the floor, the car that they copied was able to compensate for that, still running at the front fighting for a championship, and did win the Constructors' Championship, whereas Aston Martin finished way down the bottom and could not figure out the car at all.
That's
Uh,
because Mercedes engineers actually developed that car and made that car and designed it, whereas Aston just adopted it and don't really know what to do with it. They thought, well, hell, it works. Why, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But then the
yeah,
FIA come in.
it's broke, fix it.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that the engineers at Aston Martin never really understood that car, and I feel like that's going to hurt them in the long run. I feel like they're not going to understand this new car until like mid-season. That's why I have them down in seventh.
Yeah, I feel. Obviously, I'd love to see Seb do bits, but I feel like he's just
Washed up.
washed. Mm. Yeah, pure and simple about it. Um, so for my for my seventh, I had obviously Alpha Tauri. Then I've got Aston in eighth, and very much for the same reasons as you've just highlighted there. Um, haven't really seen them do much. Obviously, they're the only team to actually manage to get their aero rakes that they were trying to use to brake somehow. Um, yeah, I think. Yeah, I think they're just going to be at the back. I think they're going to be just above Haas and Williams, or at the back of the field. We don't really know because, I mean, Haas could be. We'll get to them shortly, but they could be right up there from what we've seen. But don't get me wrong, I'd love to see Aston and Seb doing well, and every car able to put a driver up there for each race and possibly be contending for the win. But I think in realistic terms, yeah, I think they're just going to be at the back a little bit, kind of pootling around because they haven't really made that many developments because they don't really know how to. They lost Otmar Safnauer, which I think he was brilliant for them. he had a lot of experience. He was very cool-headed. He knew what to do in a crisis. I think when you have two immovable objects, personalities like Safna and Stroll, i.e. Lawrence, not Lance. I think there's always, and as Otmar said himself, there's only one Pope. So
Yeah,
you can't have
yeah.
two.
Yeah,
But
and I
yeah,
would say
that's.
that it's probably really hard to work with Lawrence. You know, we saw
Mm,
last year in some clips that were brought out that he would literally walk into a meeting and just be like, "All right, you have me for 10 minutes. I got to be somewhere else for
mm.
a fucking fashion meetup or some shit that's way more important than my Formula One team that I now own." And I mean, you could even see it this year at their car launch. God, that was somebody get the hook and pull that man off stage.
I
That was
know. You just
terrible.
saw him reading the script, and he was like, "Okay," and then looks down at the floor. We here at Aston Martin have been trying to develop this car, but we're donkeys. That's all I heard. That is all I heard for 20 minutes of the big oversized jackass talking. But then I feel like, and I haven't yet watched it, and I'm hoping to watch the episode tonight, but I saw a clip from someone on Instagram posting of Dmitry Mazepin talking about the situation at Haas last season with Nikita. And I feel like when you get a billionaire, we'll call him a playboy, we'll call him a playboy. When you get a billionaire playboy like Lawrence Stroll and Dmitry Mazepin coming in and trying to wave all their money around because they've got so much money and they've always had things their way in life before, they feel like they can buy their way into it, and then suddenly that gives them the right to know what the hell they're talking about.
I actually know what you're talking about with the Haas thing. I actually saw that last night. Uh, yeah, it's the Mazepins were kind of out there. I'll say that. Trying to say that Mick had a completely different car, and that they needed to change chassis, and they changed chassis, and yeah, Nikita still sucked. So, what do you want to say about that?
Get
You
good,
know,
kid.
yeah, get good scrub. Okay, so in eighth for me, I have Alfa Romeo. If you'll remember the other day when you, me, and a couple of the other guys from Rapid Racing were talking, I said there's something going on with that Ferrari engine and
The
drivetrain wise
gearbox.
that none of the other Ferraris have. None of the other Ferrari
Yeah.
engines have. So as the Ferrari was running down the straightaway, you couldn't really hear it in the lower gears, but as they got up to like seventh and eighth gear, the top end of the gearbox, which is where it's working the hardest, it sounded completely different than any other car on the grid. Now, what I'm saying is, don't listen to the engine revs if you want to go back and watch. Don't listen to the engine revs. There's another tone there, okay, that every car has. It's coming from the gearbox, the rear end of the car. You can hear it. It's like a very high pitched kind of moaning, kind of like a squeal noise that you'll hear in the background. If you listen to the Ferrari onboards, something's up with that gearbox, and you can plainly hear it that no other car sounds like that, including the Alfa Romeo, okay? I had the Alfa Romeo in eighth place because they had a gearbox issue on the final day, and they've been struggling every day at this Bahrain test with hydraulic issues. They've been constantly having to come back in for another hydraulic leak on some part of the car, and then Valtteri retired the car on track after he got stuck in gear and couldn't get it out of gear. Uh, I'm worried about Alfa Romeo. They look like the car itself when it's running and operating. There's nothing wrong with it. Peak conditions. That car looks good. It looks like it's going to be a good midfield contender this year. But unfortunately, with the reliability issues that they've had throughout the entirety of the Bahrain test, and also the massive reliability issues they had during the previous tests in Barcelona, that's why I have them that low. I feel like they have some reliability issues they need to work out. And I also want to know what in the bloody hell is going on with that Ferrari gearbox, because you jump on board with the Alfa Romeo, you don't hear that. Something is different
You
between
don't
these
hear it
two
in the
teams,
Haas
but they're
either.
running the same engine. And I was going to say, you don't hear it in the Haas either. So I don't know what Ferrari has done different than its two customer teams back there. But hopefully somebody will be able to tell us in the near future what's different about that car, or whether they just had a camera that had a jacked up audio input on it that over those 3 days of testing. So, but yeah, I've got Alfa Romeo eighth place.
Okay, so obviously I've got Aston eighth. So my ninth is Williams. They seem to. Obviously, they had the problem with Latifi's rear end of the car, which is a serious concern. That the fact that both of these wheel hubs just spontaneously combusted, and then not only to add to that, also melted through the actual suspension arms as well, which for me is a serious problem. Um, I mean, could you imagine yourself going through Monaco or something, and then suddenly that happening going through the tunnel, and you're suddenly then having a car pile up with fire, and only about 5 marshals actually in the tunnel able to fight that. That's probably me overthinking things, but that's worst case scenario. But yeah, I feel like they've not really done very much. I mean, they obviously Latifi did the most laps. What was it, on the second or third day? I think it was. Um,
Yes, Latifi ran the most laps on the third and final day, actually. He ran 124 laps in the car with what seemed to be almost zero problems.
yeah, so that's what makes me think that maybe they probably, like what you said, maybe they tried to do an update that just really didn't pay off. But yeah, that I've got Williams in ninth. What about yourself?
Well, I'm going to guess that you and I are backwards on this. I've got Haas in ninth.
Yes.
Yeah. I put Haas in ninth just because if you look at the final times throughout the sessions for each day, Haas had a car up there in the top 10 of times. Whereas if you look at the final day of running for the Bahrain test, neither car or neither driver for Williams was in the top 10. If I'm not mistaken, they were both either 14th and 15th or 15th and 16th in the time chart on the final day. But
In representative times, in fastest times, Williams finished up 18th and 19th. Albon faster than Latifi.
okay, and I mean, the reason I'm putting Haas in ninth is because Mick Schumacher is there and K Mag is there. Mick Schumacher's been there now for an entire year. He understands how this team operates. K Mag had been there for years before he was released to be replaced by Nikita Mazepin. And then now that Mazepin's been dropped, K Mag came back, got in that car. The first day he was out in it, he immediately sets the fastest time of anybody for that day.
Mm.
Uh, I the, and because he set that time, it tells me that the Haas is a decent car to drive. Unlike previous years where it's been so hard on its tires because they had something wrong on the front axle, or last year where they just wrote the car off and they were like, we're just focusing on 2022. There's no updates coming for this car. This year, K Mag was able to jump in it first day and run a really good fast lap compared to all the rest of the field. I feel like Haas is going to take some good energy from that, and having the return of K Mag. I feel like they have two solid drivers that are on that team now. And because the cost cap is now fully in place, I feel like because this is the first year of development of a new car inside that cost cap, I feel like Haas has a good chance at doing a lot better than they have been doing. So, so I'll move on. I actually have Williams in 10th, and the reason I have him down there is because they got a whole new team structure in last year with their new team principal. I forget his name. His name is escaping me, but he's a German rally car guy. He came in and just basically said, "Look, the way this team operates, if you want me here, it's got to be redone because this is just not going to work." So they've been going through a restructure. They have
Dios
Latifi.
Capito.
Yost Capito, that's what it was. Thank you. Yeah, so they have Latifi there. Latifi did okay through his F2 and F3 careers, but he never really stood out to me. He has not measured up to George Russell at all. And now they have Alex Albon back, who to me, honestly, while he was at AlphaTauri, he was okay, and then once he got to Red Bull, uh, he just kind of acted like an entitled driver, and he acted like an entitled child. And I hope that he has worked that out of his system. Uh, but even then, he left Formula One after being sacked by Red Bull to bring in Sergio. He left Formula One and went to DTM and was getting his ass kicked in DTM by all these other F2 and F3 drivers. I really don't see Williams being a big headliner this year. I hope I'm wrong because I love the Williams organization. They were my favorite car back in the early 2000s, all the way up until they had Juan Pablo Montoya in that thing because I just hate that guy. But yeah, I've got Williams at dead last. I hope that I'm wrong and that they're somewhere up in the midfield, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, they've never really had the best run, have they? I mean, their last good year was 2016, I think it was, and that was purely just because they had Felipe Massa and their straight line speed. It's sad to see the decline of Williams, really. Obviously, they had the big takeover 2 years ago, I think it was, and then obviously the Williams family sadly lost Sir Frank last year, I think it was. It was this year. No, it was last year. Sorry. Yeah, lost Sir Frank.
It was during last season,
year.
yeah.
Yeah, and did Montoya have a stink in NASCAR? Yes, he did. No, Montoya. I don't know. How did Montoya do in NASCAR?
Yes, so JPM came over to NASCAR. He is officially the only NASCAR driver to ever crash his car into the fucking jet dryer and cause a massive explosion at the Daytona Superspeedway. Fun fact for you. He was also a shit stain in NASCAR, just like he was in F1. I was really happy to see him go. Got really excited whenever Kimi Räikkönen came over and tried NASCAR for a couple races, and then he was like, "Yeah, fuck this, I'm out." But yeah. Yeah, JPM came over. He did do NASCAR. He ran the 42 Target car for a little while. Constantly complained at his team for things that were his own fault. He was literally the Kyle Busch of his era. It was hilarious.
Yeah, right. Quickly get back to
Of course, they would ask that question because there's an American in the podcast.
Of course. That was Rapid Marvin asking away with that one question.
Right on.
Welcome. Hope you've enjoyed the podcast and the stream so far. We'll go to my 10 then, and let me just get that back round there. I've gone Haas. Purely because I haven't seen much of them. Yes, they seem to have some very good representative times. K-Mag in P10 with the fastest lap, in the fastest overall laps, and Mick going P2. Honestly, nothing. I would become a full-blown Haas fan for the rest of this season if that pace is genuine and they have just done bits. I would absolutely love that, because how amazing would it be for the Mazepins to be sat at home in their castle watching this and them just being absolutely jaw-dropped with the speed that this Haas has got and thinking, well, where the hell has that been? I think a lot of people would like to see it as well. I mean, how many people, I think, in the world would object to seeing Mick Schumacher world champion at the end of the season for Haas?
There'd be no objections for me, to be honest. I would love to have another Schumacher champion.
Hells yeah. And then that would technically take the Schumacher championships to 8. And they've just beaten Lewis.
I think you're about to piss off a lot of Hamilton fans.
But yeah.
No, I agree.
But that's my top 10. Red Bull, Ferrari, Merc, McLaren, Alpine, Alpha Tauri, Aston, Williams, and Haas. All for the reasons that we have gone into quite a bit of depth for. We've been here an hour and a half now.
Yeah, I was just about to say we ran quite a bit longer than I thought we would. But I'll say another thing. I'll agree with you on the Haas thing. If Haas, if the pace that they showed later in the sessions is genuine and that car is genuine, I will root for them full force. I will throw away all my McLaren gear that I have, because trust me, I have a lot. I'm staring here looking at my McLaren Formula One flag hanging on the wall, but I will throw all that away only if they drape that car in the Stars and Stripes.
Or put the German flag on it.
Oh no, I'll shoot a brick if they do that. There cannot be a look. I'm here.
You can't go from a Russian to a German flag.
Look, my wife is stationed on a NATO base here in Germany, but I'm not. No, no. You cannot have the German flag on the engine cover and then have the American battle flag on the damn side pod. I'm sorry. Somebody shoot that guy that came up with that design, please. No, but I think it's been a pretty good first podcast, not gonna lie. First time of us sitting down doing this. It was unfortunate that Ryan Causer couldn't join us. He had something going on this evening. Hopefully that went well for him.
Just check in, actually. He's currently live now.
Yeah, how's he doing?
Rapid Causer, where are you? There we go.
Tell me
He's currently
he's
leading
crashed out.
the race.
Oh, let's go, mate. All right, but anyway, so yeah, like I said earlier when I opened up the show, we're going to be doing this every week to review every Grand Prix. We're going to try and drop the podcast every Sunday night. So for those of y'all that enjoyed the podcast, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Give us some feedback if you're in the Discord channel. If you're new to Rapid, we do have a Discord channel. We're going to pop that link in at some point so that way you'll be able to join our Discord. We're going to have a special spot just for y'all.
See that automatically every 5 minutes, I think. So it has been going throughout the...
Beautiful. So yeah, if you want to be able to conversate with us, tell us that we're blooming idiots, or tell us that, I'm the smartest person you've ever heard in the world, which is probably not going to happen. You can click on that Discord link, join us in our Discord. We've got a lot of people in there already because Rapid also does its own Rapid Racing League, which is how this all got started. But like I said, we'll be dropping a new podcast every Sunday. And we're going to do it every week, whether they're on summer break or there's just a week in between races. We're going to try and drop one every week just to keep a steady flow of content coming for y'all that love to hear about Formula One in the real world. But until then, I'm Mike Aldifer, and that's Ryan. Or no, sorry, that's that's Jack Vaughn.
We were just talking about
we were just talking about Ryan. I'm Mike. That's Jack Vaughn, and we'll catch y'all next Sunday at the exact same time for the Bahrain Grand Prix review.